So today I wanted to go over two significant apparitions that deal quite at length with the crisis of the church during this time that we live, really the 20th century, the mid-20th century. Of course, when we hear the mid-20th century, the first thing that we think of is the Second Vatican Council and the disaster that happened in the church after the council. It's interesting, I was having lunch yesterday and he was a provincial for the Franciscan order, and he described what it was like in the Franciscans when the council had finished, and then, 1970-ish. And he said that in his class there were 40 young men for the priesthood, and in the end there were 2 that made it out. And even he was describing the story of this other priest, other seminarian, who was saying that he was going to leave. And he said he had to slap him and said, "What are you thinking?" And he used the word crisis. He said, yes, after Vatican II, we had a crisis on our hands. It's interesting that he used that word, and it's interesting also that he acknowledged that fact, which is a dramatic wiping out, almost, of that year. So that's what we think of first off. But we realize that these things, they're not made overnight. Vatican II didn't happen overnight. Vatican II was successful because of all the work that had been done forming the minds of the clergy through the years. So you think of the document, the permanent instruction of the Alta Vendita, which describes the efforts of the Freemasonic groups to destroy the church. The efforts to destroy the church. And they acknowledge themselves that this is not the work of a year, it's not the work of 10 years. It might be the work of 100 years. And we will hang on that long. We will work this diligently. We will be this subtle. We will plant these seeds. We will expect this growth. We will influence these people. And that's what they did. Everyone thinks that the church was golden before Vatican II. You pick up a book. Oh, this was written in 1920. Must be great. Not necessarily. Pius X condemned modernism in 1908? Gregory XVI condemned liberalism in 1832. 1832, condemning liberal Catholicism. This has been going on for a long time. This work has been developing and developing. And it's been done with exactness. It's been done with intelligence. Somebody was thinking these things out. They didn't happen by accident. Oh yes, Vatican II closed. A year later, all the sacraments in the church changed. Oh, that was a startling accident. It's no accident. And so, what is described here by Our Lady to Mariana about the 20th century, this was a long time in the making. She doesn't go into detail of how all of this through the course of a couple hundred years is going to develop, but she says, in the end, this is what you got. And Archbishop Lefebvre, he would probably point the finger for the most, perhaps, direct start of all this as the French Revolution. Of course, you can't say the French Revolution would have happened without the likes of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example. But he says the French Revolution was this explosion of personal liberties, which is non serviam, I will not serve. And in 1962, the French Revolution happened again in the church. And these explosions of liberties, things that were already condemned by Gregory XVI. Indifferentism, liberty of conscience, liberty of press, liberty of speech. All of these things were condemned by Gregory XVI, explicitly, using the exact terminology, word for word. All of these things were condemned. And then the church in 1962, what do? They take all those things and adapt it to themselves as now policy. And so what happens is, with the council projecting out all of these liberties, other things become more important than the faith. For example, why do religious change their statutes or their rule? Why do religious abandon their habits? Why is it that the sacraments changed? Why is it that they feel the need to write a new Mass? Why is it that they feel the need to actually construct churches according to a different principle? We can no longer build the church in the form of a cross. We'll build the church in the form of a circle to stress this theology. So what the Blessed Mother describes, it's not a shock for us, because we've seen it, all of these things, and it's actually the reason why we're here. Because we realize that we cannot go along with these types of things. Is it by accident that Woodstock was pretty much right after the council? Probably not. So I'm going to go over the text a little bit here, and it's going to involve a little bit of reading. And I think that it's actually important to read the text. And by the way, the translation that I have here is from actually the handwritten text. I didn't use the book for this translation. So Our Lady says, I make it known to you that at the end of the 19th century until a little after the 20th century, in what is today the colony and will then be the Republic of Ecuador, the passions will overflow and there will be a total corruption of customs because of the almost total reign of Satan in the Masonic sects, which principally will strive to corrupt the childhood to maintain the general corruption. So, there you've got the Masons involved, and they have an intention to corrupt child innocence, because they know those children are going to grow up. And when they do grow up, they're going to be the building blocks of new society. And if their innocence is corrupted, if their faith is corrupted, a couple generations down the road, you're going to be left with a void. Woe to the children of this time. They will receive the sacrament of baptism with difficulty. Confirmation will be the same. The sacrament of penance only when they remain in Catholic schools, in which the devil will put all efforts to destroy them using authorized persons. So the sense there's going to be an effort to remove the means of sanctification from those who need to be sanctified, so particularly the children. And you look at what has happened in the church today, how many Catholic schools are closing? I mean, they are closing in the bunches. And even those that stay open, and tuitions are $15,000 a year, even those that stay open, they no longer teach the Catholic faith. They teach religions. Religion and religions. And they teach all of these different religions without the preference of one over the other. Islam is just as valuably explained as is Judaism, or as is Catholicism, or as is Protestantism. And, the sacraments, for example, baptism will be received with difficulty. Just imagine this consequence of liberty. Because of liberty, the child is left to decide for themselves. That's this new idea in the church today. You do not baptize a child as an infant because that would be a walking over their liberty. These types of decisions are important, and they need to be made solely by their own will. Of course, in the meantime, until they get to 14 years old, they've just been destroyed with all kinds of exposure to immoralities, sensuality, immodesty. They've been destroyed. Girls in schools today are getting pregnant at 12. This happens. And so the baptism, which would have provided the exorcisms, which would have provided the beginning of the spiritual life, the sanctifying grace, the first grace into the soul, the infused virtues of faith, hope, and charity, the gifts of the Holy Ghost, all of that is not present. Except what is present is all the tendencies to sin and the best environment to actually promote that. And by the time they do reach the age, as Our Lady says, the sacrament of baptism will be received with difficulty. And it's true. That's happened and is still happening. The sacrament of confirmation will be the same. Aside from the fact that there's actually questions of sometimes of validity of the new sacrament, the fact that children are not baptized and they choose not to be so when they reach the age of 14 or 15 years old, then of course the confirmation will be the same. Of course they're not going to receive the sacrament of confirmation to make themselves soldiers of Christ and apt to defend the faith. No. Our Lady goes, one last point, in which the devil will put all efforts to destroy them using authorized persons. It's an interesting phrase. It was the best way to translate that. Best way to translate that. I think of one of the schools in the Philippines when I was stationed there. It was a Catholic university. Xavier University, Jesuit. And a certain group of zealots went around and did a survey in the student body. And the survey was, is the Eucharist a reality or is the Eucharist a symbol? And of those who answered, 71% answered that the Eucharist was a symbol. And when asked on what are they basing their answer, this is what they were told by the sisters and the priests in their child catechism. Authorized persons. The sacrament of communion will be the same way. But oh, how I regret to manifest to you that there will be many and great sacrileges, public and also secret, profaning the Holy Eucharist. How often during this period they, the enemies of Jesus Christ, instigated by the devil, will rob the consecrated hosts in the cities only to profane the Eucharistic species. My most holy Son will be seen fallen on the floor and trampled by filthy feet. Of course, the circumstances in the church today definitely do not provoke Eucharistic adoration. In fact, circumstances in the church today, they rather go along with real absence, honestly. You think about 1969 when the new Mass came out. Many people were happy with it. Many people were happy with it. A good number of people left the church. But why would a number of people be happy with it? Once again, I think they weren't in love with it. Archbishop Lefebvre was looking forward to a liturgical reform. within the church. Because he saw that these things don't mean what they should mean. And people are not impressed as they should be impressed. And people do not attend Mass like they know what's going on. And priests themselves do a shabby performance, so to speak. And we all know the stories of profanation of the Holy Eucharist, from being sold on eBay to being vacuumed up by the cleaners in the church. Dozens of hosts. And we can go on and on about those types of things. One thing of the years that I've been coming here that I noticed when saying Mass in the church, you'll notice the hosts are just like at home. That's because I brought 2,000 of them. And the reason why is because the ones they have here are so fragile and so delicate, and particles fall off all the time. Even my own paten, just from my host, when I receive communion, is covered with particles using those hosts. And then just imagine how carefree the distribution of Holy Communion is and what could be the result. Because our Lord Jesus Christ is present in those particles. St. Thomas teaches that. And in this my convent there will be faithful souls, fervent spouses, and lovers who will make reparation with loving tenderness, suffering from seeing him so hated by their ungrateful brethren, those sinners who will seem to have no human heart. The astute devil will attempt to impede this, putting ideas of despair in the imagination of my suffering daughters to make them lose the merit. So once again, the importance of the religious vocation, the fact that Mariana is told that the spouses and the lovers of Christ, which is the religious life, the consecrated souls, they are the ones who can act as this kind of defense. And yet the devil will go after them so much so as to make them despair and to abandon their vocation. But in those times they will already know you and also the favors that I have dispensed to you. So this is Our Lady talking to Mariana, which is the understanding that this title of Our Lady and Mariana herself would become known in this same time of crisis, and known for a reason. How I love the happy inhabitants of this sacred enclosure. This knowledge, together with the love and cult to my sacred image, which I strictly order you today to have made as you see me, put me upon the abbess's chair, so that from there I will govern and rule my daughters and sustain my convents against the fierce determination that Satan will have to destroy it, availing of good and bad men. So you heard even good Catholic presidents have tried to take even that convent. By this time, in this poor country which will lack the Christian spirit, it's the best way of saying it. We're talking about a subculture that exists now. Lacks the Christian spirit, the sacrament of extreme unction will be little respected. Many people will die not receiving it because of the neglect of families, because of misconceived affection towards the sick, and also because of some who oppose the Catholic Church, instigated by the accursed devil, depriving the souls of many innumerable graces, consolations, and strength to make the big leap from time to eternity. The Church doesn't talk this way anymore. Some will also die without receiving it by the just and secret punishments of God. That's liberalism again. How so? Well, with one's liberty of conscience, conscience becomes the rule of morality, which is exactly this whole dilemma in the church today with regard to marriage, with regard to same-sex marriages, with regard to the divorced and remarried receiving communion. It's the same thing. Liberty of conscience. My conscience is free, and I determine my conscience. I inform my own conscience the way I see fit, and in the end, I only answer to my conscience. And if my conscience says to me, you're still a good guy, and you are in the state of grace, I don't care what anyone else says. There's a complete blindness that way. That's really what it is blindness. And since that liberty of conscience, no one would ever accuse another of a sin. A sin. And then if there's no sin, well, why would you need the priest for extreme unction? Dad's a great guy. The priest doesn't need to come and see him. What does she say? Because of the neglect of families and the misconceived affection towards the sick. And that happens. Many will die without receiving this grace. The Sacrament of Matrimony, here's a kicker, which represents the union of Christ with the Church, will be attacked and profaned in the full extent of the word. The rule of Masonry will establish its laws to extinguish it, facilitating all to live immorally and propagating the procreation of illegitimate children. Without the blessing of the Church, the Christian spirit will rapidly decline, extinguishing the precious light of the faith until it reaches an almost total and general corruption of customs. This, together with secular education, will be the reason for dwindling of priestly and religious vocations. You cannot give what you don't have. If we've produced a generation of not having, there will be no giving. And that's the problem in the church today. Profaned in the fullest extent of the word. I wonder if Mariana could possibly imagine what we've got today. Is it even possible to think? We don't need to really go into detail about that. I'm sure that you're well aware of what's going on, not only within the world, with this movement, which the movement, it's so diabolical. Because, how have revolutions always worked in the history of men? Revolutions work by the zeal of the few evil people. And the zeal of the few evil people, because of their zeal, they win. Look at the Russian Revolution. Don't think it was thousands and thousands of people that pulled off the Russian Revolution in comparison with the general population. It wasn't. The general population could have cared in the least about revolution. It's the same thing here you saw in the streets yesterday. These rallies going off and how the riot police had to be deployed at one point. But that's in this city. What about all the people out there who really don't even care? The revolution is the minority. It's just they work harder than the others. And they succeed. The whole LGBT movement. I hate using that expression. That whole movement, is it even 1% of the population? And imagine how they dictate policy in this country. They dictate that policy. They rule. They rule the other 99% because we're all a bunch of sheeple. That's why. And what they've done to marriage is outrageously disgusting, filthy. I think it was Our Lady at Fatima said that you will know it's coming to an end when you see them go after the sacrament of marriage, the institution of marriage. And boy, are they going after it. The sacrament of holy orders will be mocked, oppressed, and despised because they, the Masonic sect, oppress and violate the Church of God and God himself in his priests. Then the devil will endeavor to persecute the ministers of the Lord in all ways and will labor with cruel and subtle astuteness to deviate them from the spirit of their sublime vocation, making them degenerate into debauchery. Seen that? Scandalizing the Christian people many times over. They, the bad priests, will draw upon all the priests the hatred of the bad Christians and of the enemies of the Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church. So let's again look at some numbers. How many cases of, I don't even want to use the word, scandals, priestly scandals, how many cases have come out and been confirmed? Is it even 1%? But boy, you know the media is going to explode that, and the bad priests are actually going to destroy the reputation and the sanctity of the church, so that the good priests are going to be dragged through the dirt. And the church will lose any kind of influence, any kind of ability to direct and to rule, to teach, rule, and sanctify. They will lose their mission because of these things that happened by the 1%. With this apparent triumph of Satan, they will draw immense sufferings on the good pastors of the church and on the great majority of good priests. And the supreme pastor and vicar of Christ on earth, who is prisoner in his Vatican, will shed secret and bitter tears in the presence of God and his Lord, begging for light, sanctity, and perfection for all the clergy of the world, of whom he is king and father. It's interesting there, that term's prisoner in his Vatican. Of course, we would initially think of Pius IX, and Our Lady does say the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. And on another occasion, she says the second half of the 20th century. But it's true, you had the fall of the Papal States. I still wonder if there's more application to that expression. Someone else is in the Vatican still, too. Moreover, in these ill-fated times, there will be unrestrained lust, which will captivate countless frivolous souls who will be lost for being the snare of sin for the others. Innocence will almost no longer be found in children, nor any sense of shame in women. And this supreme necessity of the church, he who at the time should have spoken will be silent. And that's an interesting, he who should have spoken will be silent. Obviously that could be a single individual, but it could also be a bunch of individuals. Imagine the amount of clergy today that do not tell the people that they are in sin. I mean, we know it's a sin to miss Mass on Sunday with no reason. Oh, I just felt like I'd sleep in. That's a grave sin. How many pastors today, aside from the need for the Sunday collection, are going to focus on that? So that apparition, and actually that's not the full text of the apparition, but it was the meat and potatoes. That was in 1610 on January 21st. Another one, and like I said, when I was writing this, what I wrote, I picked two that I thought were very impressionable, very complete, a lot of details. So this one, when I was on February 2nd, 1634, which Mariana died on January 16th, 1635. So this is roughly a year before her death. Mariana was praying in the upper choir in the middle of the night, as was her custom. She saw the sanctuary lamp go out, leaving the main altar completely dark. She thought to go and rekindle the lamp, but when attempting to move, she was unable. Then Our Lady appeared and lit the tabernacle lamp. Then the Blessed Virgin spoke to Mariana. The lamp that burns before the prisoner of love and that you saw extinguished has many meanings. The first is that at the end of the 19th century, and will continue to a large part of the 20th century, various heresies will spread in these lands, then already a free republic, The precious light of the faith will be extinguished in the souls by the almost total corruption of customs. In this time there will be great physical and moral calamities, private and public. I think what's important to understand as well, Our Lady speaks often of these things happening in Ecuador. And it does not mean that these things will not be happening somewhere else. It simply means that Mariana is being given information which is perhaps a little more concerning for her. Everyone would be a little more concerned about their own house or their own land or their own country. And on other occasions, she does generalize as the entire church. The small number of souls in whom will be preserved hidden the treasure of the faith and of the virtues will suffer a cruel and unspeakable as well as prolonged martyrdom. Many of them will descend to the grave from the violence of the suffering and will be counted as martyrs who sacrifice themselves for the church and for the country. In order to be freed from the slavery of these heresies, those whom the merciful love of my most holy Son will destine for this restoration will need great strength of will, constancy, valor, and much confidence in God. To put to test this faith and confidence of the just, there will come moments in which everything will seem lost and paralyzed, and then will be the happy beginning of the complete restoration. It's an echo of, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. Interesting also, those whom the merciful love of my most holy Son will destine for this restoration. So it points to the fact that there will be people involved with the work that they do who will help or will execute the plan of God. The third reason, I skipped the second one because it had something specifically to do with the convent. The third reason why the lamp was extinguished is in these times there will be an atmosphere filled with the spirit of impurity, which like a filthy ocean will flow through the streets and squares and public places with an appalling liberty, so that there will be almost no virgin souls in the world. The delicate flower of virginity, like a flower that is timid and threatened with complete destruction, will shine far, taking refuge in the cloisters. It will find a suitable land to grow, develop, and live, its fragrance being the delight of my most holy Son, and the lightning rod that holds back the divine wrath, without which it would be necessary to rain fire from heaven to purify these lands. So the importance again of the religious life. The virgins taking refuge in the cloisters, who will act as a lightning rod to hold back the divine wrath. Our Lady at La Salette spoke similarly, that she was the one holding back the arm of Jesus from striking. The fourth reason why the lamp was extinguished is that the sect, having seized all social classes, will have so much subtlety to introduce itself into domestic households that, ruining childhood, the devil will glory in preying the exquisite delicacy of the hearts of children. In those ill-fated times, childlike innocence will barely be found. In this way, vocations to the priesthood will be lost, which will be a true calamity. Once again, you cannot give what you don't have. If society has produced a glorious glass of absolute nothing, then nothing will come from it. And that's why Archbishop Lefebvre said every vocation today is a miracle of God. The religious communities will remain to sustain the church and to work with valiant and selfless determination in the salvation of souls. Religious communities is an interesting expression as well. Obviously, you could refer to religious orders, could refer to clerical institutes like our own. It could probably also refer to different kinds of associations. The religious communities will remain to sustain the church. The religious communities would remain. What does that say for the whole diocesan structure? It doesn't say that parish churches are going to be shining beacons of faith. They will remain to sustain the church. Everything else will be lost. It is because at this time the regular observance will shine in the communities. There will be holy ministers of the altar, hidden and beautiful souls, in whom my most holy Son and I will take delight with the exquisite flowers and fruits of heroic sanctity. And that is exactly the reason why we are here. Yes, it's great to do the things that we did this past couple days, to see the things that we saw. But as I said to you at the beginning, do not think that your presence here is to just come and get something. Your presence here is to give something. There will be holy ministers of the altar, hidden and beautiful souls, in whom my most holy Son and I will take delight. That is what we are trying to provoke. That's what we're hoping that our presence will lead to. You can't give what you don't have. Not trying to sound pompous, but we do have the faith. We do have the faith, and therefore we can give it. And if we can give it, someone can receive it. And if they can receive it, it can grow. And when it grows, things will change. Imagine a transformation in the religious communities of this city. What kind of good that could provoke. Just imagine. Against these ministers, impiety will wage a cruel war and will fill them with vituperations, calumnies, vexations to impede the fulfillment of their ministry. But they, like most firm columns, will remain steadfast, confronting everything with the spirit of humility and sacrifice, with which they will be clothed in virtue of the infinite merits of my most holy Son, who loves them like the most delicate fibers of his most holy and tender heart. So there's going to be good ministers doing something good. That's what Our Lady says. Hopefully that could be us. And not only us, anybody who's a minister of Christ, if they're doing good. In those times, in the secular clergy, there will be much to desire, because the priests will neglect their sacred duty, losing the divine compass. It's a beautiful expression. Losing the divine compass. They will stray from the path charted by God in the priestly ministry, becoming fond of money and striving to obtain it to excess. And since the Church will suffer the dark night of the lack of a prelate and father who watches over with paternal love, with gentleness, strength, sound judgment, and prudence, many of them will lose their spirit, placing their souls in great danger. So there she just described a situation in the Church when the lack of direction will be present. There will be no direction. It will be like chaos. And that's very much upon us today. Very much. Since the Church will suffer the dark night of the lack of a prelate and father. And normally that's the Pope's job, right? He's the father of Christendom. So what could she possibly mean? The dark night of the lack of a prelate and father. And it's interesting what she describes. She describes the virtues of a good prelate and father. She describes the virtues. But they will all be lacking. So today in the Church, in this time, there will be no sound judgment, there will be no prudence, there will be no strength, there will be no gentleness, there will be no paternal love, and they will lose their spirit, the clergy, because of that. Pray insistently, clamor without tiring, and weep with bitter tears in the secrecy of your heart. asking our Celestial Father that for love of the Eucharistic heart of my most holy Son, for this precious blood poured out with so much generosity, and for the profound bitterness and sorrows of his bitter passion and death, that he may be compassionate to his ministers and put an end as soon as possible to these so ill-fated times, sending to this church the prelate who must restore the spirit of her priests. Now, that's obviously the one that most of you would be famous, or most of you would recognize, the famous passage there. Archbishop Lefebvre made reference to that in the consecrations of the 4 bishops in 1988. Archbishop Lefebvre certainly has done a lot for the church to restore the spirit of her priests. He was rector of a seminary. He was a founder of seminaries as Archbishop of Dakar, as apostolic delegate. Priestly formation was definitely... It's not without reason that when seminarians were looking for formation, where do we find a solid traditional formation? Because we don't want to go to these Catholic universities, we don't want to go to these seminaries anymore because of the nonsense that we're being taught. So where do we go? Apparently, Archbishop Lefebvre must have had a great reputation as one who keeps the spirit of the priests, because many people told these seminarians, go to that man. He is the man to go to. Interesting. And of course, we might think that, to restore the spirit of our priests, it is true that the spirit of the society is the Mass and the priesthood. That's our bread and butter. That's what we focus to. So it would be easy to assert that those words refer to Archbishop Lefebvre. However, there are other occasions in this work in which the prelate is mentioned with specific tasks that he has. And Archbishop Lefebvre did not do those. So I would not be too hasty to assert dogmatically that was Archbishop Lefebvre. God knows. Bishop Fillet could be him. God knows. Could be the bishop of this city. God knows. With divine gentleness, he will guide the consecrated souls to the divine service in the cloisters, without making heavy to them the yoke of our Lord. Now, it's true, Archbishop Lefebvre was directly/indirectly involved with, for example, the work of the Benedictines down in Silver City, probably also the work of the Dominicans, probably the work of the Franciscans. But those words still don't really seem to fit him. To have the prelate and father soon, they, those consecrated souls, will counterbalance the tepidity of all the souls consecrated to God in the priestly and religious state. So the few saintly religious are going to counterbalance the bulk of worldly religious. This is the precise cause of the accursed Satan taking possession of these lands, who will obtain it by all means of so many foreign faithless people which like a black cloud will obscure the clear sky of the then republic consecrated to the most sacred heart of my divine Son. Prophecy of that consecration by Garcia Moreno. The then consecrated republic to the Sacred Heart. This is the precise cause of the accursed Satan taking possession of these lands. What was the precise cause? It was the consecrated souls and the lack of the number, the good consecrated souls. The good consecrated souls will be counterbalancing all the bad. if you spend your time more concerned about counterbalancing or preventing, it's like behaving all the time in crisis management. There's not much growth in crisis management. Which is why the society doesn't spend its time bantering on all kinds of suggestions of whether or not this guy's the Pope. Introduced by these faithless people are all the vices. Because of them are all types of chastisements, among them pestilence, famine, and conflicts among themselves and other nations, losing a considerable number of souls so dear to Jesus and me because of apostasy. To dissipate these black clouds which prevent the possession of the clear day of liberty of the Church, which, by the way, is the liberty which St. Paul speaks of, the liberty of the sons of God, there will be a formidable and frightful war, in which blood of their own and strangers, of secular and religious priests, and also of religious will flow. This night will be most horrible, because to mankind evil will seem to be triumphant. Then is the coming of my hour, when I, in an amazing way, will dethrone the proud Satan, crushing him under my feet, and chaining him to the infernal abyss, finally freeing the church and country from his cruel tyranny. So those are the contents of 2 of the many apparitions that Our Lady, when she appeared to Mariana, and also our Lord appeared many times to Mariana. Is this a giant I told you so? Because we know, we're aware of these problems in the world and in the church today. So what's the benefit of then looking over something like this which we already know? And I think the benefit, I think she lists a program. Because you can look at it from the side of all of these evils. For example, she goes through each of the sacraments. We know the sacraments, all the sacraments after Vatican II were changed. But she lists all the sacraments and the destruction that's going to happen to them. So we can see the side of devastation, but if you flip it around, it's actually telling you what needs to be done to restore. So baptism is not going to be given, and confirmation neither. Well, the ministers of the church better start teaching and providing for that. And the Holy Eucharist being profaned. This has to stop. Which is why the whole scenario of the new Mass needs to stop. And we see this loss of the priestly spirit. What would Archbishop Lefebvre say? It's time to restore the priestly spirit. It's only going to happen when young men are going to go to the seminary. And young men are only going to go to the seminary when they are the fruits of a solid Catholic upbringing within solid Catholic parents who possess good spiritual lives, and a kind of culture that supports them, which is the work of a mission. You know, when the Jesuits came into these countries in South America, they didn't come to, I'm just going to give you the Holy Eucharist. They came here to create Catholic civilization from the dirt, right from the ground up. To create a whole Catholic way of life, like a unit. You think of the Russians' idea of the commune. They wanted to take villages and build them from the ground up. Take people that were living in the sticks or in the bush or along the creek and bring them together and raise a civilization, a Catholic civilization. And that's exactly what the mind of Pius X was, to restore all things in Christ is to recreate the civilization. And it was exactly the mind of Archbishop Lefebvre when he saw the necessity of priests in this situation in the world, because the priests were going to have to be the ones to raise this civilization. It is kind of a circular thing. And this is the program. The Sacrament of Matrimony. We have to teach on the glories of the married state, the responsibilities of the married state, the graces and the means of sanctification contained within the married state. We have to teach how offensive to God all these other things are, all these unnatural things. We see all the sacraments, extreme unction, we do our best for these things. It's a program that she's putting before our eyes if we look at it rightly. A program. And all of us who have this kind of awareness of what's going on, we must really bend ourselves to put into this program. It's a very difficult thing. You know, you see, for example, I was talking with one individual just about some of our missions, for example, and how there is not really a lot of support. I come from a very small chapel. We're 50 or 60 people. Not many. We have some vocations coming out of there by the grace of God. But nonetheless, in our chapel, where I'm from, we've always understood that we were a bit of a trampoline. Because the number of people that have actually started out in our chapel in Hudson Falls, New York, the number of people that have bounced there and then scooted out, it's a pretty good number of people. Another number of them went up to Nickelville. Why? Because there was a school. And that school is very important for the Catholic life, Catholic culture, Catholic perspective, Catholic faith. And you think about all the people in our missions everywhere, you've got people trampolining all the time because they're looking to go for something better. I remember telling Father Beck when he was prior in St. Mary's, I said, in my opinion, you should be encouraging people to go somewhere else because this is just becoming too big. You know, there's 10, 15, 20 families moving in every summer. They're trampolining because they want something more. They want a Catholic culture and a Catholic civilization. And when you see this desire, and I realize that not everybody can move, and I'm not saying that everybody should move, but I'm looking at the people who have done so and what has motivated them. And then when you compare that with those who will not hear anything of it, the priest sees it and says there's something wrong. There's something wrong. It's a failure to recognize the great goods and means of sanctification and support for truly Catholic life which exists in many of our institutions. But if there's a refusal to see it, there may not be the possibility to go to it, but to try to convince oneself that it's no big deal, or to ignore the fact that it's a great good, God's not going to bless that. So let us understand the apparitions here. Let us understand it more as a program. I think Archbishop Lefebvre didn't know it, but that's what he was talking about. He was talking about a program in which we will go forth and multiply, and we will make all things new again. That was his aim. So let us understand that also of Our Lady here in Quito, Our Lady of Buen Suceso.